Queen Clara walked through the long hall of her palace, her golden crown shining under the tall lights. Her steps were calm, but her mind was restless. She had chosen to marry Ethan, a man who was not born into noble blood. Many in the kingdom did not agree with her choice. The nobles whispered that she had made a mistake. They said Ethan was plain, ordinary, and not strong enough to stand beside a queen. Clara heard these words often, and though she stayed proud, a quiet question sometimes touched her heart. Ethan lived in the palace now, but he was not like the nobles. He did not wear fine clothes every day. He spoke with simple words and spent more time with the guards and workers than with the lords. He treated everyone with respect, whether they were servants or soldiers. People liked him, but they did not understand why the queen had married him. To most, he looked like a man who had nothing to give except kindness. On a bright morning, Clara sat by the window of her chamber. She looked down at the garden where Ethan was speaking with a group of young guards. He smiled as they laughed, his hands moving as he showed them how to hold their swords with better balance. Clara watched in silence. He moved with ease, not like a man who had never seen battle, but like someone who understood it well. Yet he never spoke of his past, kept his life before the palace hidden, and Clara sometimes wondered what secrets lived behind his calm eyes. The nobles entered the chamber later that day. Lord Vincent, one of the oldest advisors, bowed and said, "My queen, the people question your marriage. They fear that your husband is weak. They believe he cannot protect the throne." His words were careful but sharp. Others nodded in agreement. Clara's face stayed still, but she felt their doubt pressing against her. She looked at Ethan, who stood quietly beside her. He did not answer, did not argue, only bowed his head as if the words did not hurt him. This calmness made Clara both proud and unsure. When the council ended, Clara walked with Ethan through the gardens. The air was warm, and the sound of water from the fountain filled the silence. At last she spoke. "They doubt you," she said. Ethan gave a small smile. "Let them doubt," he answered softly. "I do not need to prove myself with words. Time will show them the truth." His voice was steady, and Clara felt a strange strength in it. She wanted to believe him, yet a shadow of fear still lingered. What if the nobles were right? What if love had blinded her judgment? That night, a feast was held in the grand hall. Musicians played, and the tables were filled with food. The nobles watched Ethan carefully as he sat by the queen's side. Some whispered, some laughed behind their cups. Ethan noticed but did not react. Instead, he raised a cup and toasted to the kingdom's peace. His voice was strong, carrying across the hall. The common people in the hall cheered for him, and Clara saw warmth in their eyes. They trusted him more than the nobles did. When the feast was over, Clara sat alone in her chamber once again. She thought about the day, about Ethan's calmness, about his quiet power. She knew there was more to him than anyone saw, even more than she had seen. Her heart told her he was not ordinary, that there was something hidden deep within him. She did not yet know what it was, but she felt the day would come when the truth would rise like the sun over the kingdom. Outside the palace walls, in the dark lands beyond the city, enemies watched with cold eyes. They saw the queen's marriage as a weakness. They planned to strike when the time was right. But they did not know the man who now stood beside the queen. They did not know the strength he carried within him, a strength that even Clara herself had not yet fully seen. The days in the palace grew heavier as news of unrest spread across the kingdom. Reports came from the border towns that rival lords were gathering forces. They spoke of rebellion, of breaking away from the crown. Queen Clara listened to the council with a steady face. But in her heart she knew the danger was greater than the nobles admitted. Enemies were watching her throne, waiting for the right moment to strike. Ethan walked beside her through these tense days, calm as always. He did not sit much in the council, but he listened carefully. Others spoke in loud voices. He stayed quiet, his eyes sharp, as if measuring every word. Clara noticed how he remembered every detail, how he asked questions that even her generals had not thought of. She wondered again who he truly was before he came into her life. But Ethan never gave answers about his past. He only said the future matters more than what is behind us. One evening, Clara stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The streets were full of torches as people returned from work. She felt the weight of her crown pressing heavier than ever. Ethan joined her, standing close but silent. At last she spoke. "They are preparing for war. I can feel it." Ethan nodded. "Yes, he said. "They think the throne is weak. They think I am weak. That is why they move now." His voice was calm, but Clara felt a spark of steel in his words. She turned to him, searching his face. "And are you weak?" she asked. Ethan's eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "No," he said simply. In the palace yard, the soldiers trained harder each day. Clara often watched them, but one morning she found Ethan standing among them. He was dressed not as a noble but as a soldier, plain shirt and boots, a wooden staff in his hand. The guards laughed at first, thinking the queen's husband wanted to play at fighting. But when they stepped forward to spar, Ethan moved with speed and skill that shocked them. His strikes were clean, his stance unshaken. One by one, he bested them, not with anger but with control. The laughter turned to silence, and even the captain of the guard bowed his head with respect. Clara saw it from the balcony. Her heart beat faster as she watched Ethan fight with such ease. He had never shown this side before, not to her, not to anyone in the palace. She felt both fear and pride rising within her. Later that night, she asked him, "Why do you hide this from me?" Ethan sat quietly for a moment before answering, "'Cause I wanted you to choose me for who I am, not for what I can do. Power can draw false love. I wanted the truth." Clara was silent, touched by his words, yet still filled with questions. She wanted to know how he had gained such strength, but Ethan said no more. The nobles, however, did not stay silent. Rumors spread through the palace that Ethan was dangerous, that he kept secrets from the queen. Some said he could not be trusted, that he would bring ruin to the throne. Clara faced these whispers every day, but she refused to doubt him. Still, the shadows of worry grew longer. Beyond the palace walls, enemy lords gathered their armies. They sent spies into the city, spreading fear among the people. Markets grew quieter, and soldiers spoke of battles to come. The air itself felt tense, heavy with waiting. Clara knew war was moving closer, step by step. One night, as Clara sat in her chamber, a messenger rushed in. His face was pale, his voice shaking. "My queen," he said, "the border has been attacked. Villages burn, and their soldiers march toward us." Clara stood, her eyes wide with shock. But before she could speak, Ethan rose to his feet. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with a hidden fire. "Then it begins," he said. "Let them come. They will learn that this throne is not as weak as they believe." Clara looked at him, and for the first time she felt a strange certainty. Ethan was more than the man she married. He was something greater, something the kingdom had yet to see. The night was restless in the palace. The sound of running feet echoed through the halls as soldiers prepared for battle. The enemy had crossed the border and burned 3 villages before sunrise. Queen Clara stood in the war chamber with her generals gathered around a large table covered in maps. Their voices were full of fear and doubt. They argued over defenses, over numbers, over strategies, but none could agree. Clara's face stayed calm, but her heart raced. She knew her throne was under real danger. Ethan walked into the chamber quietly, yet his presence made the room fall silent. The generals looked at him with cold eyes, doubting his place among them. One of them, Lord Vincent, spoke harshly. "This is no place for a man who has never led an army. The queen must be protected, not distracted." Ethan met his words with calm silence, but Clara raised her hand. "He stays," she said firmly. None dared to argue with her command. Ethan stepped forward to the map and studied it with sharp eyes. His hand traced the lines of the rivers and hills, then rested on the small villages marked with red ink. "They strike here to test us," he said. His voice was clear, not loud, but steady. "They want to see how weak we are. Right. But if we wait here behind walls, they will grow bold. They'll march straight to this city." The generals frowned, but Ethan continued. "We must meet them before they reach the gates. Use the rivers as barriers, split their army. Force them into the open ground, where their numbers will mean less." The generals murmured among themselves, surprised by his knowledge. Clara watched him closely. This was not the voice of an ordinary man. This was the voice of someone who had seen war before. She felt a chill, but also a spark of pride. The next day, soldiers marched out under the banners of the crown. Clara rode with them at the front, her crown hidden beneath a soldier's helm. Ethan rode beside her, plain armor upon his shoulders. The city watched in silence as their queen and her husband left for battle. Some whispered in fear, others prayed, but in every eye there was doubt. Could this man truly stand against the storm that was coming? The clash came at dawn on the open plains beyond the river. Enemy soldiers filled the horizon, their armor dark, their banners flying high. The ground shook with their march. Clara's men lined the hills, shields raised, spears pointed forward. Fear moved through the lines like a cold wind. The generals gave orders, but it was Ethan who stepped forward to the front. He raised his sword high, his voice carrying across the field. "Hold the line," he called. "Trust your strength. Trust your brothers beside you. Today you fight not for crowns, not for gold, but for your homes, for your families, for the queen who stands with you." His words lit fire in the hearts of the soldiers. They raised their swords and shields, their voices rising in a roar. Clara felt her chest tighten as she watched him. He was no longer the quiet man she married. He was something greater. The enemy charged, a wave of steel and fury. The clash was thunderous, the air filled with the sound of metal on metal. Ethan fought at the front, his sword moving with deadly speed. No blow struck him. Every strike he gave was true, cut through the enemy like water through stone, his presence lifting the courage of all around him. Soldiers who had been trembling now fought with fire, following his lead. Clara too took up her sword and fought beside her men. She saw Ethan ahead of her, his movements sharp, his strength endless. The enemy tried to surround him, but he broke their lines again and again. His voice rose above the chaos, calling orders, guiding the soldiers with precision. It was as if he had been born for this very moment. By noon, the enemy began to falter. Their lines broke under the weight of Clara's army, and soon they were fleeing across the fields. The plains were littered with shields and fallen men. Soldiers of the crown cheered, raising their weapons high. They called Ethan's name again and again, their voices filled with awe. Clara stood among them, her sword stained, her body trembling with both exhaustion and relief. She looked at Ethan, standing tall and calm among the victory. She knew then that the man she had married was not ordinary at all. He was more than a husband, more than a consort. He was the shield of her kingdom, the strength that no enemy could break. And for the first time, the nobles who had doubted him began to bow their heads in respect. The palace bells rang across the city as word of victory spread. The people filled the streets, cheering the queen and the man who had stood beside her in battle. Flowers were thrown, songs were sung, and hope returned to the kingdom. Yet inside the palace the nobles were uneasy. They had seen Ethan fight, and now they whispered not about his weakness but about his strength. Some feared that a man with such power might overshadow the queen herself. Clara sat in the throne room, her crown set aside, her eyes watching the light fall across the floor. She thought of the battle, of the way Ethan had fought with skill no ordinary man could match. Pride filled her, but so did questions. At last, when they were alone, she turned to him. "I must know the truth. Who are you really, Ethan? No ordinary man fights as you do. No ordinary man commands soldiers with such strength." Ethan looked at her for a long time. His face was calm, but his eyes carried weight. "I am a man who has lived many lives," he said at last. "Before I met you, I walked through wars. I trained under masters who taught me not only to fight but to endure. I learned in silence, far from the eyes of kings and crowns. I never wanted power. I never wanted glory. I wanted only peace. But when I saw you, Clara, I knew my place was here, by your side. To protect you and the people you love." Clara listened, her breath steady, but her heart full. "Why hide this from me?" she asked. Ethan shook his head gently. "Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I can do. A queen surrounded by lords and warriors needs someone who sees her as more than a crown. I wanted you to see me as a man, not a weapon." His words moved her deeply. She reached for his hand, and for a moment the weight of the throne felt lighter. Yet even as she felt this bond, she knew the nobles would not rest. Already their whispers spread through the palace halls, and already new threats grew beyond the borders. That night, Clara called her council together. The generals bowed, the lords stood stiff, and Ethan remained by her side. Some nobles praised his skill, but others spoke with sharp tongues. "The people shout his name louder than they shout for their queen," one lord warned. "If his strength is greater than all, what stops him from taking the throne for himself?" The hall filled with murmurs. Clara rose, her voice strong. "He is my husband, and he is loyal to me and to this crown. His power is not a danger, it's our shield." Ethan stood quietly, saying nothing. His silence seemed to trouble the lords even more, but Clara would not bend. Still, she saw the doubt in their eyes. She knew the kingdom had won a battle, but trust within her own walls was not yet secured. In the days that followed, Clara and Ethan walked among the people. The markets were alive again, children played in the streets, and soldiers spoke with pride of their victory. The people bowed deeply to their queen, but they also reached for Ethan's hand, calling him protector, calling him brother. He accepted their words with humility, never raising himself above them. Yet Clara saw how much they loved him, and she knew that love could one day stir fear among the lords. Trouble soon returned. Spies brought word that another host was gathering beyond the far hills. Unlike the first attack, this enemy was larger, stronger, and determined to break the crown once and for all. Clara's generals prepared, but their faces were dark with doubt. They had seen victory, but they feared the cost of another war. One evening, Clara found Ethan in the training yard. He was alone, his sword flashing in the fading light as he moved with quiet precision. She watched him, her heart torn between fear and faith. At last she spoke. "The burden grows heavier. Do you ever regret this path?" Ethan lowered his blade and turned to her. "No," he said, "this is where I belong. I was not born to sit upon a throne, but I was born to guard it. Whatever comes, I will stand." Clara stepped closer, placing her hand on his arm. She saw the truth in his eyes. He was not just her husband. He was the wall between her kingdom and ruin. The world beyond the palace was sharpening its sword once again, and soon the test of his strength would rise greater than before. The morning sky was heavy with clouds as the sound of drums rolled across the land. The enemy had come in greater numbers than before, their banners black against the horizon. Villages emptied as people fled toward the city for safety. From the palace towers, Queen Clara watched the dark mass move closer. Her people looked to her for courage, but in her heart, she knew this battle would decide the fate of the crown. In the war chamber, generals argued once more. Some wanted to shut the gates and wait out the siege. The others wanted to scatter the army and fight in small groups. None agreed, and fear hung thick in the air. Ethan stood silent at first, but then he stepped forward. His voice was steady. "If we wait behind these walls, they will break us. If we scatter, they will crush us one by one. We must strike with all we have, meet them not with fear, but with fire." The generals doubted him, but Clara raised her hand. "His words are mine. We will not hide. We'll fight together." The decision was made. Soldiers prepared, armor clashed, and the city braced itself for war. On the day of battle, the queen rode out with her army. She wore armor of silver, her crown left behind. At her side was Ethan, plain armor shining with the light of morning. The people lined the walls and called their names. They did not cry with fear but with hope, for they had seen victory once and prayed to see it again. The clash began before noon. The enemy roared across the field, a wave of steel and fire. Arrows darkened the sky, and the ground shook under the charge. Clara's soldiers raised their shields, their hearts steady with Ethan's voice ringing over the battlefield. He led from the front, his sword cutting through the enemy line with fierce strength. Where he stood, the soldiers stood firm. Where he moved, the army followed. The battle raged for hours. Clara fought beside her guards, her arm heavy, but her spirit unbroken. She looked often for Ethan, and each time she saw him, he was like a pillar no storm could move. The enemy tried to surround him, but he broke their lines again and again. His voice carried over the clash, guiding, commanding, lifting courage where fear had taken root. At one moment, the enemy pushed close to Clara's line. She raised her sword, but before the strike could fall, Ethan was there. His blade met the foe with a crash, driving them back. His eyes burned with fire as he stood between the queen and death. "No harm will come to you," he said. Clara felt her heart tremble, not with fear, but with a deep, unshakable faith. By late day, the enemy's strength began to fade. Ethan called for the final push. Clara's soldiers surged forward, their voices rising in a great roar. The enemy broke, their banners falling as they fled across the fields. The ground was littered with the signs of battle, but the crown still stood unbroken. The kingdom had won. The people filled the city with cheers as the army returned. They called Clara's name, but louder still they called Ethan's. To them he was not only the queen's husband, he was their shield, their protector, the man who had turned despair into victory. Clara stood beside him on the palace steps, her heart filled with pride. She raised her hand for silence. This kingdom stands because we stand together, she declared. And beside me stands the man who has given us more than victory. He has given us hope. The people roared with joy, their faith in the crown renewed. Even the nobles who once doubted bowed their heads, for they had seen the truth with their own eyes. That night, Clara walked with Ethan through the quiet gardens. The sky was clear now, the stars shining above. She looked at him and said softly, "You are more than I ever dreamed. You are the true strength of this throne." Ethan shook his head gently. "No, Clara, the strength is yours. I only stand where I must to protect you, to protect them." Clara smiled, her heart calm at last. Together they looked toward the future, knowing the kingdom had entered a new age. The queen and the man she loved would rule side by side, their bond unbroken, their power unmatched. And though the world beyond still carried storms, within their realm there was light, a light no enemy could put out.